Welcome to the Week 8 Waiver Wire Show. Today, we'll be discussing the top waiver wire pickups at each position, including deeper league targets. Stay tuned until the end, where we answer listener questions sent in on Twitter. I want to be clear, if those is watching on YouTube, we do have thresholds for guys that we talk about. Dalton Kincaid, we will mention on this show, but I will say that Dalton Kincaid was a little bit too already rostered to make our graphic here for those of you watching on YouTube. And also Kareem Hunt, in the wake of the Jerome Ford injury, is too owned to be on this graphic here, but they are certainly both very strong ads. Maybe we should just start there off the top, Sam. If Dalton Kincaid or Kareem Hunt is available in your wire, is that a break the Faab situation for you? Or what do you think about for people who have those two guys, Kincaid and Hunt, on their wire?
Yeah, starting with Hunt, I don't think he's necessarily a break the Faab ad, just because the Jerome Ford injury is reportedly minor. I know Schefter mentioned he expects him just to miss 1 to 2 weeks. Now, we know with high ankle sprains, that could linger to 3, 4, maybe 5 weeks. That said, it's not a season-ending injury for Ford. So as a result of that, I wouldn't go all out for Kareem Hunt if he's available on the wire. That said, he is a very good ad, maybe up to 50, 60% of your Faab. If you're super desperate for running back points, I can see going close to all in there. But yeah, he's somewhere in that range for me. Do you agree with that, Adam, or any thoughts on Hunt?
See, my thought is that I think that they're going to be very aggressive with Kareem Hunt's role here in the short term. They have Pierre Strong. They added Jordan Wilkins. They might bring Deion Jackson back on the practice squad, but Kareem Hunt is clearly the best guy that they have. And he knows the system. He's been with Cleveland for so long. So I assuming Kareem is healthy. I think he got banged up in that game against Indy, and that's why Pierre Strong played so much. I do think that Kareem Hunt is a pretty good ad. And on Jerome Ford, I mean, Schefter called it a low-grade high ankle sprain. There's no such thing. A high ankle sprain is trouble, man. They told us Kyren Williams was only going to be out a week, maybe. Now Kyren Williams is on IR with a high ankle sprain. So, yeah, I think that it's pretty strong here. We do have Pierre Strong on this list, though, while we're on Brown's running back. Assuming Kareem Hunt is gone, what do you think about adding Pierre Strong here this week, Sam?
Yeah, I think Pierre Strong is a strong ad, no pun intended. He was in basically a 50-50 split with Kareem Hunt last week after Jerome Ford got injured. Now, I think that's because either Hunt got banged up in the game. He also entered the game with a groin injury. We actually had doubts as late as, Sunday morning about if Hunt would even play last week. So I think that's why Strong saw so much playing time. I would not expect it to be a 50-50 split between Hunt and Strong, probably something closer to 70-30, 60-40 in favor of Hunt. That said, I think Strong is going to be somewhat of a 1B in this backfield. And again, just getting the guy who's one injury away from a bigger role is always a pretty good ad off the wire. So I do like Strong as sort of a tier 3 or 4 ad this week, maybe sprinkle 0 to 5% of your Faab, something like that. I don't think he's going to cost you a lot to add.
Yeah. I mean, my concern is that they've mostly just seen Strong as a special teamer this year, and I think that's ideally how they want to use him. So, yeah, I'm not going to go nuts on Strong. The Rams running backs are the story of the week, which actually kind of confuses me. Like, hopefully you guys are in-season subscribers and you watched the show on Friday night, because we talked on Friday about how Zach Evans was going to be a 0. Henderson and Royce Freeman were going to be the starters here. They also have Myles Gaskin, who could come off of who was inactive this past week, but could be active in week 8. And then they have Kyren, of course, who's on IR. Now, Darrell Henderson was ahead of Royce Freeman. They were both pretty good in that game against the Steelers. I don't see much reason for them to change anything going forward, i.e. Henderson, the 1A, Royce Freeman, the 1B. Sam, how would you be handling Rams running back off the wire this week?
Yeah, so amongst the most commonly owned players, and I define that as players that are less than 30% or so owned on ESPN, Darrell Henderson is my top ad of the week. He's like you mentioned, I'm shocked he only got to 12% owned on ESPN. I guess like a more macro level take for you guys out there, make sure you're monitoring news throughout the week. Don't just read my waivers article on Tuesday and Wednesday and then make your claims and log out. I do the best I can with the information I have on Tuesday, but these things change a ton during the week. So Henderson was a clear situation where things changed and he should be, 50, 60% added already. But anyways, yeah, like you said, I don't see why they would change up Henderson's sort of 1A usage in Los Angeles. He's familiar with the system. He played well enough, converted a short yardage touchdown, was relatively efficient on the ground. I expect this sort of 1A, 1B situation to hold until Kyren Williams returns. And we should get a pretty decent stretch of games, maybe 3 to 4 more games with Henderson in that role. I think he'll project as sort of a low end RB2 throughout that time period. And that makes him worth, 20, 30% of your Faab, I think, to get an RB2 for the next handful of weeks.
Yeah, agreed. And I, Sam's point about understanding adding guys when there's news on Friday, Saturday, Sunday is a huge edge. There's just not that many people that are thinking about doing that. I mentioned Kincaid at the top. We do have Trey McBride in here. We got news this morning that Zach Ertz would miss at least the next 4 weeks with an injury. Trey McBride, who I think should have been playing 100% of the snaps anyways, now projects to be around 100%. Meanwhile, Dalton Kincaid gets the Dawson Knox injury. I'm curious who you would prefer there if they're both available, Dalton Kincaid or Trey McBride going forward.
Yeah, I do prefer Kincaid there just for the offensive environment. Even with Kyler Murray perhaps coming back in the next couple of weeks, the Bills week over week are just going to project to score so many more points than the Arizona Cardinals. And I just want a piece of that offense, of the better offense in that situation. Now, Kincaid, the stats, if you look at them, they haven't been great so far. Obviously, he had a pretty good game last week, going 8 for 75, I believe, on 8 targets. Besides that, he has not really earned targets at a high rate, has not really ran a lot of routes, but that is going to change when Dawson Knox exits the picture. I think he's going to move to close to a full-time player. And if he can just be okay at earning targets on sort of a high volume Bills offense, I think he's going to be the much higher upside add than Trey McBride.
Yeah, I mean, Dalton Kincaid's ADOT still concerns me, right? Even in this game this past week against the Patriots, it was 4 yards. It's really hard to have big fantasy games when your ADOT is 4 yards. But what you saw against the Patriots, 8 catches for 70 yards, I mean, that's a smash at tight end, right? And I do think that that's definitely possible for Dalton Kincaid. Certainly think he's a little bit better in full PPR than half or non. But yeah, I think so too. I am excited for Trey McBride, though. Former Mackey Award winner. Kyler should be back in week 9 or week 10. We have Kyler on the list here also. And so, yeah, I think if you need tight end help, it's thin, but I'd be willing to at least take a shot on Trey McBride. We also have Kyler on the list here and Amari DeMercado. Weird stuff with Amari DeMercado this past week where he went from basically Keontae Ingram was the feature back to Keontae Ingram played 0 snaps, offensive snaps in week 7. They get DeMercado back in the mix here. I know people were killing themselves over torching too much Faab on Amari DeMercado, but now maybe they should be happy about it. I don't know. Do you have any read on this Arizona running back situation, Sam?
Yeah, I'm getting whiplash for this one. I felt like an idiot for recommending him as the top ad 2 weeks ago, and now maybe that prediction is working out. Honestly, I think anyone who's saying they know what's going on in this Arizona backfield is lying to themselves. I think the team is firmly in experimentation mode in the absence of James Conner. And I wouldn't be shocked if next week we see Keontae Ingram back in the picture or a bigger role for Damian Williams. I think we just have to admit that we can't expect DeMercado's workhorse role in week 7 to be sticky. That said, there's a chance of it, right? There's a chance he holds this role, and that makes him certainly worthy adding off the waiver wire. I have him as a top 3 ad off waivers this week. I think in the range of 5 to 15% of your Faab is reasonable. Just don't be caught off guard if next week he's, back to a more limited role. I think it's just hard to predict what's going on here.
Yeah, and it's, James Conner is not out for the season. At some point he's going to be back. And, but I do think Kyler Murray coming back does help them. And if you do need quarterback help, like people who may have had Deshaun Watson or Justin Fields or something like that, I do think Kyler, again, will be back week 9 or week 10 for people looking to explore that route. Couple wide receivers I wanted to mention that are on our list here. Kendrick Bourne continues to play well anytime Juju Smith-Schuster is out. I mean, clearly Mac Jones and Kendrick Bourne have something going on. Also, Jalen Hyatt is now a full-time player and a very talented one. I think, at that in terms of big plays. Deeper leagues for Jalen Hyatt, it's not going to, the floor is like 0 every week.
Yeah.
But deeper leagues for Jalen Hyatt, I think, is interesting. Any more wide receiver takes? Oh, and Jaden Reed, we also have on the list with Christian Watson getting banged up late in that game before.
Yep, those are all good to note. And I think, yeah, on Reed, monitor the Watson injury stuff. It seems like reports are that the MRI came back negative. So it seems that Watson is okay. I think there's still a chance he misses some games, which would make Reed more interesting. The final one I wanted to add on wide receivers that I think are going under the radar this week, Demario Douglas on the New England Patriots. He's a rookie 6th round wide receiver from Liberty. He actually surpassed Devontae Parker in routes last week. He was up to 75% of routes, drew some targets on his routes. He's actually top 20 in the NFL on a small sample size in terms of targets per route run. So again, this is more in terms of sort of a deep league stash, but I think there is a chance the Patriots say, hey, Devontae Parker, hey, Juju Smith-Schuster, you guys can't really provide anything at this point in your NFL career. Let's roll out the younger player and Kendrick Bourne. And maybe, the offense looked more passable this past week with Douglas playing this larger role. So anyways, that's more time than we need to spend on Demario Douglas, but I think he's an interesting stash for deeper leagues.
One more on this page here. Devin Singletary played like slightly ahead of Dameon Pierce in their game before the bye, which was so weird. I don't really know what was going on there. I don't think that's going to be sticky, but Devin Singletary is only 14% owned on Yahoo. If he's going to continue to play 1A or 1B with Dameon Pierce, certainly worth an ad for some people. I do think Pierce will be back to his ahead role this week, though. Any thoughts on Singletary?
Yeah, I feel similarly to you. I think he's worth adding. Anytime we see a running back play the majority of the snaps, they're certainly worth adding off the waiver wire. I would expect Pierce to bounce back and have the top role again, but frankly, I don't have a ton of certainty in that. And I just kind of want pieces of this Texans offense, right? Like CJ Stroud's playing really well. They have a good set of weapons, pretty good tight end, Dalton Schultz. I think there's a chance that these running backs will score more touchdowns in the stretch than they have to start the year. And if you get a chance at getting a lead back on Houston for what I assume you can get Singletary for pretty cheap off the waiver wire this week, I think he's certainly worthy of an ad.
Yeah, just one more follow-up on the Jaden Reed thing. Christian Watson did say that he feels like he's going to be fine, just has to get some of the pain and swelling out of his knee there. So we'll see, but it doesn't sound like a long-term thing for Christian Watson, but still, it's not like he's some massive target earner anyways. So yeah. All right. Keep it moving to best of rest targets. Anybody here you want to highlight? Sam, obviously we had Marvin Mims run a season high in routes per dropback, and the Jerry Jeudy trade rumors are coming. However, Marvin Mims continues to underperform and score, I believe he scored negative points again this week. Any thoughts on the best of the rest here?
Yeah. A couple guys that I know we've talked a lot of these guys before, but a few things worth mentioning. Michael Wilson, I think, is intriguing just because of Kyler Murray's return. He hasn't really been someone who's worthy of consideration in your starting lineup so far this year. But if Murray returns and plays well, Wilson is sort of the clear wide receiver 2 on that offense. I think he could be interesting down the stretch. Another guy on the running back side is Chris Rodriguez. Again, more for deeper leagues. He kind of forced a 3-way committee in Washington, getting 7 carries to Brian Robinson's 8 last week, and had more touches than Antonio Gibson over the past 2 weeks. So if you are looking sort of for the contingency stash in Washington, I actually feel better about it being Chris Rodriguez than Antonio Gibson at this point. And I also even think that they could just involve the rookie more down the stretch without an injury to Brian Robinson. I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, but he's someone worth mentioning in deeper leagues.
For sure. We do have Trey McBride ahead of Michael Mayer. I do want to be clear that Michael Mayer's role was still really good in that game against the Bears. They pulled the starters late, and Michael Mayer got pulled with the rest of the starters, so his underlying usage doesn't look great, but I still think Michael Mayer has a good and ascending role for this Raiders team. So I would have it pretty close between him and McBride. I would agree with Sam that Dalton Kincaid is a cut above those two guys at the tight end position. We are 1 week away from the trade deadline. The big one is Jerry Jeudy. There's some other guys out there that could be moved to open up things. Derrick Henry could get traded. I mean, Tajee Spears is not on this list because he's too owned. But if Tajee Spears is on your wire, you need to have Tajee Spears badly ahead of this trade deadline. There's been some other rumors. We've tried to stay on top of it as part of the rest of the season, top 150. But yeah, there's other trade rumors out there too. Anything else ahead of the trade deadline that you want to mention, Sam?
No, I don't think anything else that I could think of trade related. The one other thing I did want to mention, sorry, not related to the trade deadline, is the Bill situation with Khalil Shakir. He's moved into the number 3 wide receiver on the Bills, and also with Dawson Knox out, I think they're going to be forced to run a lot more 3 wide receiver sets. So definitely, he's someone who's maybe somewhat viable as a start if he can hold down the slot role and has some contingent upside if Diggs or Davis were to be injured. So he's worth mentioning here.
Yeah, their number 3 tight end, Quentin Morris, is also hurt. I'm not sure if he's going to be up this week or not, but yeah, I mean, they've been running so many 2 tight end sets and 3 tight end sets, and they're going to have to go 3 wide receiver a ton. Will the Bills? Should we get to some deep league? Oh, you want to do drops or deep league?
We can do deep league. I don't think much to hit on the drops.
Okay. Deep league, we get exciting names such as Myles Gaskin, who I mentioned, Brandon Powell, who is running a ton of routes for the Vikings, who had actually a pretty decent game last night with Justin Jefferson out. And then we get the Pierre Strong situation also. Anybody you want to highlight here for our deep league friends?
Yeah, a couple situations I want to call out. The Bengals and Bucks backfields are both in this similar situation where the starter has just been incredibly inefficient. Now, I don't think in Cincinnati we're going to see Travion Williams or Chase Brown overtake Joe Mixon. I'm not saying that, but I think it's at least possible they use the bye week to figure out which one of these backup running backs they want to give a little bit more run to. Man, Mixon's just been so bad. And I know they trust him in pass protection. And just him being an inefficient runner doesn't mean he's gonna get off the field. But I think in deeper leagues, just taking a stab in one of these backup Cincinnati running backs is interesting to see if they have a bigger role out of the bye. And then in Tampa Bay, kind of a similar situation. I have both Keyshawn Vaughn and Chase Edmonds, who's set to return from IR on this list. Again, super deep league stuff we're talking about here, but one of these Tampa Bay running backs does have an opportunity if they can be a better rusher than Rachaad White. But man, it's been rough for all Tampa Bay running backs. So it's hard to make a confident prediction there.
How about Jake Bobo, man? Steve from Florida, the artist known as Steve from Florida, actually was like almost a 1-for-1 replacement with DK Metcalf in terms of usage and had a pretty nice game. Jake Bobo has also had a pretty nice preseason. Obviously, JSN's role expanded, but Jake Bobo's role actually changed the most. I don't think that DK Metcalf's injury is serious and long-term, but I just want to put that out there for the extreme deep leaguers that if DK Metcalf is going to miss, it looks like Jake Bobo is a 1-for-1 replacement there. Also, we do have Donald Parham on the list here. Gerald Everett hurt his quad last week. Everybody knows Donald Parham by now, hashtag team XFL. Awesome player who has never gotten enough opportunity. If you're in a pinch, Donald Parham with Gerald Everett possibly out could work. Mentioned Brandon Powell. Those would probably be my favorites. Oh, and Pop Douglas. Those would be my favorites on this list here. Anything else you want to talk about on Deep League, Sam?
Two last final things. I think Juwan Jennings, kind of similar to Jake Bobo. If Debo misses a game, the Jennings role was actually quite strong on Monday night. He had 9 targets, 5 catches. He was clearly the guy who got the bump in usage over Ray McLeod. So yeah, if you're really in a pinch, I think you could start him while Debo's out. And then the final thing I'll mention, I think as we shift the playoffs, if you're rostering some like really dusty tight ends like Durham Smythe, like guys like that who you're just never going to start, just pick up Noah Gray and stash him instead. Like I know rostering handcuffed tight ends is not that common in fantasy, but if Kelsey were to get injured, I think Noah Gray immediately becomes a top 12 tight end in terms of projection in fantasy. And he's widely available in these tight end premium leagues. I don't really get it. I think he's a, really high upside stash if Kelsey were to go down. So yeah,
I like that one. All right. Anything else you want to say about waivers this week, or shall we get to the questions that the people have?
Let's get to questions.
Let's get to questions. All right. First one from Fantasy Zeke says, if you're trotting out streamer tight ends such as Logan Thomas, how aggressive should I be going after Dalton Kincaid in Faab? I don't think Logan Thomas is like that bad of an option in the right spots. Obviously, I prefer Kincaid. How aggressive do you think Fantasy Zeke should be here, Sam?
Yeah, so I think not that aggressive. I would say something in the range of 10 to 20% for Kincaid. And that's because, yeah, I think you look at Logan Thomas's underlying usage, it's actually better than Dalton Kincaid's been thus far. There's also going to be other guys likely available on waivers in your league, like Trey McBride, Jake Ferguson, maybe Michael Mayer, maybe. And I do like Kincaid better than all these guys. I'm not saying that he's not my preferred target of the bunch, but I wouldn't spend a ton to go Kincaid over McBride or Kincaid over Logan Thomas. Like, I don't think it's that different. I'd prefer to save my Faab for, handcuff running backs and situations like that later in the season, I think.
BH for Press says, does Kendry Miller have any contingent upside? I feel like even if Kamara goes down, Jamal Williams will have most of the base down work and all of the goal line work. Is Kendry Miller droppable? Sounds like a sharp guy here, because that was the same thought that I had. And I kind of think that Kendry Miller is droppable. They have shown very little faith in Kendry Miller. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, man, it's a bummer because he's a rookie that we were excited about. But I think in your shallow, most home league formats, he's firmly droppable. I mean, even when both Jamal and Kamara were out, we saw like a 50-50 split with Tony Jones. Like, man, if you're rostering one of these backup running backs, you want to have someone that is going to be going into a big role if the starter goes down. And I don't think we know that at all about Kendra. So, yeah, shallow leagues, I think he's definitely droppable.
Josh says, what are some of the best stashes to return late season value that could be available on the waiver wires? So I don't want to just throw some names out off the top of my head here. We weren't really prepared for this question, but we are adding to Jack's buy sell article. For those of you guys who have Draft Kit Pro or in season, we're adding to Jack's weekly buys and sells article a section about preparing for the playoffs, about if you have a 5-0, if you have a 6-1 team, if you have a 4-2 team, whatever, if you have a very good team, guys that you can be stashing for late season value, to answer Josh's question. So be sure to check that out. T-Boz says, is Kyler Murray worth the stash for the playoffs? He has a week 14 bye and then a matchup against the 49ers in week 15. I personally would not consider Kyler Murray like set it and forget it. Oh, I got this great quarterback. He would just be like a top end streamer type quarterback for me to see how he plays. We know he needs mobility. He's coming off an ACL, so there's plenty of risk here. But yeah, Sam, what do you think about Kyler Murray as a stash for the playoff push?
Yeah, I think he's definitely worth the stash. I understand T-Boz's concerns with the bye and the 49ers matchup. But, man, a lot of these back-end quarterback ones are either injured or struggling. Justin Fields doesn't have a firm timetable for return. Deshaun Watson looks really rough. Anthony Richardson's out for the year. Daniel Jones is injured. Like, a lot of these teams who have back-end quarterback ones are probably struggling for quarterback points right now. So in that context, I think Kyler Murray is definitely worth a stash if you have one of those teams that has sort of a struggling quarterback thus far.
Steph Diggs Burner says, is Tank Bigsby still considered a high-end handcuff, or is it time to grab Jerick McKinnon? McKinnon had a long touchdown called back, reminiscent of last year. I still think that if something happened to Travis Etienne, it would be mostly Tank Bigsby. I can't say that with a ton of confidence, but that's still what I think. Curious what you think, Sam. And also, like, Jerick McKinnon is really hard to start. I mean, he has so many like 0-point games in his bag. I know he can score touchdowns because he's used around the red zone a lot. But yeah, what do you think about this one? Sam, Tank Bigsby or Jerick McKinnon?
Yeah, so if the question is like who has more contingent upside, I think it is Tank Bigsby. Even though they have been mixing in D'Ernest Johnson a little bit, it still has been Bigsby as sort of the clear running back 2 over D'Ernest Johnson in Jacksonville. And I think if Pacheco went down, you'd see a lot more CEH in that situation, and McKinnon's role wouldn't change drastically. I think you would see more McKinnon, but not like a 70%, 80% snap player by any means. So yeah, if we're talking contingent upside, I'd go with Tank Bigsby. I will caveat that by saying, man, like when you watch Tank Bigsby in games thus far, he looks not good at all, but I mean, he's a rookie and could get better, but it has been a very, very ugly start to his NFL career.
Well, it's been ugly for him, and ETN has been awesome, and that's kind of allowed the Jaguars to literally barely play Tank Bigsby, like barely. His touch projection each week is like 2, maybe 3.
Yeah.
MLB PMAU says, is Zach Charbonnet still a good bench stash for Kenneth Walker owners? I'm 5-2 and have Walker, so thinking he's a good pickup after he was dropped last week, or prefer Roshan. We also got a similar question from Snoop Frog, who said, when Roshan Johnson returns, will he immediately jump into the 1A for the Bears, or did he miss his opportunity to take command of the backfield? If I have Walker on my team and Charbonnet's out there, I am adding Charbonnet for sure. I know that like there's a lot of anti-handcuff bros out there. We are now in week 8, and I've seen enough to know that if something happened to Kenneth Walker, I think Zach Charbonnet would easily be a top 15 running back. Roshan's situation is a bit different. Deontay Foreman played well. Khalil Herbert will be back in, who knows, 3-4 weeks or something like that. I think Roshan's going to be part of a committee no matter what, whereas Charbonnet could actually, if something happened to Walker, get the whole job. But yeah, what do you think there about Roshan's situation coming back and any Charbonnet thoughts, Sim?
Yeah, so obviously, like if you had to start one of them next week or maybe in 2 weeks, Roshan would be better. But if we're talking upside for a stash, I think Charbonnet is just a much, much better stash than Roshan. Man, the Bears are just not. I know we saw last week Donta Foreman go off, but up until last week, they'd been like bottom 3 in the NFL in terms of generating fantasy points to the running back position. With Justin Fields in there at quarterback, it just doesn't really do a lot for the running backs. And also, Donta Foreman's just a really good rusher. Like I tweeted this out before the show, but he was number 1, obviously a small sample, but he's been number 1 in rushing success rate in the NFL this far this year, number 5 in rush yards over expected per attempt. And that's not some like fluky 1-game sample, because last year in 2022 on a much bigger sample, he was 1st in the NFL in rushing success rate and 9th, top 10 in rush yards over expected. So I just think it's going to be like sort of a Gus Edwards, Justice Hill type committee in Chicago between Donta Foreman and Roshan Johnson, where they play similar numbers of snaps. But I would expect Foreman, the bigger back, to get the goal line carries and get most of the carries there. So I don't know. I just can't get that excited about Roshan. I think we're talking about a 50-50 guy in a Bears backfield. I'd much rather have the upside of Charbonnet compared to Roshan, I think.
Okay. Last one we're going to do today comes from Flicker. He says, how do you play the possible Titans sell-off? Are Malik Willis, Will Levis, Tajay Spears, Treylon Burks worth pursuing? So we already mentioned this briefly. To be clear, now that they traded Kevin Byard, who is very, very good NFL player, it seems like perhaps they're opening the floodgates to trade away guys like Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry, DeAndre Hopkins before the Halloween trade deadline. Treylon Burks has been out with a knee injury, but he reportedly practiced all week during the bye, whatever that means. We'll see his week 8 status here. Obviously, it will be a boost for him if DeAndre Hopkins goes. Tajay Spears should be on a team right now. If he's not, you should add him quickly. The quarterback situation, though, man, that could really mess everything up, because if Tannehill goes and they have to go to one of Will Levis or Malik Willis, I have major concerns about the validity of this offense going forward. So what do you think about Treylon Burks? I know we've talked about him as a drop candidate before. Any other Titans thoughts here?
Yeah, I think the player I'm most interested in on this list, like by far, is Tajay Spears. The rest of these guys, man, I have a hard time getting excited about either of these quarterbacks. I guess in Superflex leagues, they're becoming relevant, even without a trade, because Tannehill's banged up right now. I think you can sort of make speculative ads on both of these guys in Superflex leagues. And then for Burks, man, I don't know. I guess he's kind of like Quentin Johnston for me, where if I can and I do have the bench space, I do want to stash him because I like the talent profile, high draft capital, but A, he just hasn't shown a ton in his NFL career. And then B, this situation is just going to be so bad with either Malik Willis or Will Levis throwing him the ball that, man, I understand if you want to drop him for someone like Josh Downs, Kendrick Bourne, Darrell Henderson, even. I'm cutting him for those guys for sure.
Yeah, agreed. I don't feel like I'm missing out on that much by not having Traylon Burks on my team. And I like Traylon Burks. I like him way more than Quentin Johnston generally. I mean, at least Traylon Burks has had some flashes in the NFL that he can really be good. We have not seen anything close to that from Quentin Johnston so far. All right. Appreciate the questions from everyone. As always, that is going to do it for your Week 8 waiver wire show. For more in-depth on everybody that's available on the waiver and Faab recommendations, head to establishtherun.com. Check out Sam's article. For Sam, for producer Steven, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.